I never thought a company retreat could flip my entire life upside down, but that's exactly what happened the day my CEO walked onto the stage and announced, with a calm smile, "I value all my directors except the liability." For a second, no one reacted. It was like the whole room froze, breaths caught halfway, eyes darting around as if waiting for someone to explain whether this was a joke, a test, or some new motivational technique gone wrong. But the way he said it, slow, clear, and without even a hint of laughter, told me everything. He meant it, and I already had a terrible feeling about who he was talking about. The warm lights of the luxury resort ballroom suddenly felt too bright, too hot, like I had been pushed into the center of a spotlight I never asked for. The retreat was supposed to be a weekend of team building, relaxation, and celebrating the company's yearly success. Everyone else had arrived looking excited, dressed casually, carrying fruity mocktails and gift bags like they were on a mini vacation. I came with a simple bag, a tired smile, and the hope that maybe this weekend would be peaceful for once. I should have known better. With my CEO, peace was never guaranteed. His name was Raymond Cross, a man who loved dramatic entrances, expensive suits, and long speeches that always sounded like TED Talks that didn't quite land. He wasn't cruel, at least not openly. He had this way of criticizing people with a soft voice that somehow made it sting twice as much. You wouldn't even catch the insult until minutes later, when you replayed his words in your head and realized he had practically sliced your confidence in half without raising his tone. And I, director of operations, hardworking, quiet, the one who kept everything running smoothly behind the scenes, had never made it onto his favorites list. Not that I needed to be his favorite. I just needed to do my job, protect my team, and survive the corporate storms that came and went. But somewhere along the way, someone started whispering things about me. Small things at first. Comments about delays, mistakes that weren't mine, mixed up numbers I never touched. I caught the looks. I felt the shift. And now, hearing the CEO say the word liability with that sharp finality, I knew exactly what label he had finally decided to put on me. Everyone else in the ballroom tried to stay expressionless, but their discomfort showed. You could see it in the stiff posture, the quick glances at me, the way conversations suddenly died. No one wanted to be caught reacting. Corporate survival mode. I was used to it, but it didn't make the moment any easier. My best friend at work, Amina, sat beside me. She nudged my hand under the table, a silent stay calm, though her own face looked like she was trying not to stand up and yell at the CEO right there. The retreat had barely started. Just an hour ago, we were all laughing during breakfast, joking about the team-building games we'd have to do later, like trust falls and blindfold challenges, stuff everyone pretended to hate but secretly enjoyed. I had even allowed myself to relax a little, drinking a cup of chai on the ocean view terrace, letting the breeze lift away some of the stress I carried from months of nonstop work. I didn't know my CEO was preparing a surprise for the whole company. A grand announcement, one that would aim a spotlight at me without warning. Raymond paced slowly across the stage, his shoes clicking loudly against the wooden floor. "A company can only grow if every director carries their weight," he continued. "But some people slow us down." His eyes scanned the crowd, and even though he didn't say my name, I felt his gaze land on me like a heavy hand on my shoulder. A part of me wanted to stand up and speak, defend myself, tell him exactly what parts of the company I held together every single day. But I stayed quiet, not out of fear, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared, but because I knew speaking up now would only make it look worse. A few people shifted in their seats. One of the directors from finance coughed awkwardly. My chest tightened. I didn't want to be the center of this kind of attention. Not in front of my colleagues, not in the middle of a retreat, not in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration. But the CEO wasn't finished. He never stopped halfway. "For the first time," he said, spreading his arms as if announcing something inspirational, "I will be making changes. Major changes. The kind that determine who stays and who doesn't." A soft wave of murmurs rippled through the room, quickly dying as he raised a hand. "But before I reveal what those changes are," he added, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I want each director to look around and think honestly, who among you is holding the rest back?" My heart dropped. This wasn't just a speech. This was a setup. Amina sighed beside me, whispering, "He's doing this on purpose." He wants you to react. But I kept my gaze steady, locking it on the stage, refusing to give Raymond the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I knew what this was really about. A month ago, I uncovered something, a mistake in the reporting system that pointed back to someone high up. Numbers that didn't match. Budgets that were shifting in ways they shouldn't. I tried to raise it quietly, professionally, but the moment I did, things changed. People avoided me. Meetings I used to be invited to were suddenly full. My suggestions were brushed off. And now, after weeks of tension, here we were at a retreat with the CEO, publicly hinting that I was a burden. But the thing about secrets is, they don't stay buried forever. And the mistake I discovered wasn't small. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't something the CEO could risk letting me talk about. So he created a label for me. Liability. Raymond stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean in. By the end of this retreat, he said slowly, we will uncover the truth. And the person who stands in the way of this company's success, he paused, smiling again, will be removed. A cold silence fell over the room. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression calm. If he wanted a reaction, he wouldn't get one. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't leaving this retreat quietly. I had evidence. Real evidence. And if he pushed me into a corner, I wasn't going to break. I was going to expose everything. But before I could even think of my next move, something unexpected happened. A voice from the crowd spoke up, someone I never expected, and that one sentence changed everything. The voice came from somewhere behind me, steady but bold enough to slice through the heavy silence in the ballroom. I think, the person said, if we're looking for truth, we should start by asking what exactly we're being kept in the dark about. Every head turned. Even Raymond paused mid-stride, that confident smile flickering just slightly. I twisted in my seat, surprised to see who had spoken. It was Daniel, one of the senior analysts. Quiet, usually invisible during big meetings, someone who kept to spreadsheets and reports and rarely made eye contact unless necessary. He was the last person I expected to speak up during a high-pressure moment like this. Daniel stood slowly, adjusting his glasses as if steadying his nerves. His face didn't show fear, though it showed something else. Determination. The kind that doesn't appear out of nowhere. The kind that means he knew something. And maybe he knew something about the same numbers I had discovered weeks ago. All eyes shifted from him to the CEO. Raymond raised an eyebrow, amused but obviously annoyed that someone had interrupted his dramatic moment. Is there something you'd like to say, Daniel? He asked, voice calm but sharp around the edges. Daniel didn't sit down. He swallowed once, then said, I just think it's strange that we're talking about liabilities when some departments haven't submitted accurate reports in months. It feels unfair to blame a single director when the problem might be higher up. A ripple ran through the room, tiny gasps, quick glances, confused whispers. The kind of reaction that happens when someone finally says what everyone else has been too scared to mention. I watched Raymond carefully. His jaw tightened for just a second. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me. I had worked with him long enough to recognize that twitch. It was the same look he had when someone cornered him with a fact he wasn't prepared to spin. His smile returned, but it was thinner this time. Thank you for your input, he said, waving a dismissive hand. But I think we're straying from the purpose of this retreat. Please take your seat. Daniel hesitated, then slowly sat, but his eyes met mine across the room. It was quick, barely a second, but it told me everything he knew. He knew something about the financial mistake, maybe even more than I did. Amina leaned closer to me, whispering, Okay, something's definitely going on. He wouldn't risk saying that unless he was sure. I nodded slightly, trying to appear calm, even though my heart was racing. This wasn't just about me anymore. If Daniel had noticed discrepancies too, then the problem was bigger than just the numbers I had uncovered. Someone had been manipulating something for months, maybe longer, and now the cracks were starting to show. Raymond continued his speech like nothing had happened, brushing over Daniel's comment as if it meant nothing. He talked about team unity, upcoming goals, the future of the company, standard motivational stuff, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. People weren't focused on his words anymore. They were focused on the tension, the unspoken question hanging in the air, the quiet unfolding of something hidden. Even the CEO noticed it, He wrapped up faster than usual, thanking everyone and announcing the next part of the schedule: outdoor activities, lunch by the beach, and a leadership reflection session in the afternoon. Everyone clapped politely, but the moment he stepped off stage, the room broke into scattered whispers. I sat still, trying to process everything. The CEO had practically painted a target on my back, but Daniel had just hinted that the real problem wasn't me. That someone else, someone powerful, was behind the strange reports. And if that was true, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the small mistakes that kept appearing on documents I never touched. Amina grabbed my arm as the room began to empty. "You need to talk to him," she whispered urgently. "Daniel, before someone else does." I nodded, but I waited until the crowd thinned. The last thing I needed was to look like I was plotting something. At a retreat filled with directors, managers, and a CEO who already wanted me gone, even a normal conversation could be twisted into something suspicious. When I finally stepped out of the ballroom, the hallway smelled faintly of ocean air drifting in from the open lounge. The resort was beautiful: white marble floors, tall windows, beach views everywhere you turned. It was supposed to feel like a reward, a break from the stress of corporate life. Instead, it felt like a stage, a perfect place for the CEO to play out whatever plan he had in mind. I spotted Daniel near the coffee station, filling a small paper cup with tea. He glanced around nervously before walking toward the terrace. I followed at a distance, giving him space so it wouldn't look obvious. When he reached the far end of the terrace where fewer people were standing, I stepped closer. "Daniel," I said softly. He turned quickly, almost dropping his cup. When he recognized me, his shoulders relaxed slightly. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. "Why did you speak up?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He let out a shaky breath. "Because someone had to. And because I don't think you're the liability he's talking about." He paused, glancing toward the ballroom doors as if checking if anyone was listening. I noticed the numbers too, the changes, the inconsistencies. My stomach tightened. "How long?" "Since 5 months ago," he said quietly. "And I've been keeping copies. Screenshots, backups, everything." He pushed his glasses up nervously. I didn't know what to do with them. Until now. 5 months. That was longer than I expected. The issue wasn't small. It wasn't accidental. It was intentional and carefully hidden. Someone had been altering financial data for almost half a year. And if Daniel had proof, then whoever was behind it would do anything to keep that proof from coming out. Before I could ask more, footsteps approached. Daniel stiffened instantly. A group of directors walked past us, laughing loudly, not paying attention. But the tension between me and Daniel didn't ease until they disappeared around the corner. "We can't talk here," he said quickly. "Too risky. People are watching everything today." "I know," I whispered, "but we need to figure out what to do. If the CEO is planning to pin this on me—" "He is," Daniel said without hesitation. "Someone wants you out. Maybe because you're the one most likely to notice the errors. Or maybe because you already did." My pulse raced. "What are you saying?" Daniel hesitated, lowering his voice even more. "I think the CEO knows someone has been altering reports, and instead of fixing it quietly, he wants to blame it on you." The words hit me like a shockwave. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. Someone else had come to the same conclusion. Someone who had seen the numbers from the inside. "Meet me later," Daniel said, checking his watch. "After the afternoon session. I'll show you what I found. But be careful. If he senses we're trying to expose anything—" He stopped mid-sentence. I followed his gaze. Raymond stood at the far end of the terrace, watching us. Not smiling, not speaking, just watching. Daniel stepped back instinctively. I forced myself to stay still, even though every instinct screamed for me to look away. Raymond held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable, then turned and walked back inside. Daniel exhaled shakily. "He knows," he whispered. "Or he suspects." I swallowed hard. "Then we don't have much time." And just like that, the retreat, which was supposed to be relaxing, had turned into a quiet battlefield. And the next move would decide everything. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the retreat shifted into its next phase. People wandered toward the outdoor activity area, pretending to enjoy the bright weather and ocean view, but the tension from the morning still hovered around everyone like an invisible cloud. Conversations were quieter, eyes more alert, and every group seemed to be whispering about the CEO's strange announcement. No one dared say anything directly, of course. At a company event like this, silence was safer. I tried to blend in, walking with Amina toward the open lawn where the first team activity was set up. A few directors gave me polite smiles, the kind you give someone you pity but don't want to be associated with. Some avoided eye contact altogether. I didn't blame them. No one wanted to be seen too close to the so-called liability. Not when the CEO was watching everything. Raymond stood near the large white tent where refreshments were set up, talking to the head of HR with his arms loosely crossed. He looked calm, collected, even friendly. But after the way he had watched me and Daniel earlier, his relaxed posture felt more like an act, like camouflage for whatever he was planning next. "Just keep it normal," Amina whispered, nudging me as we joined one of the activity groups. "Smile. Laugh if they make a bad joke. Don't give him anything to use." I nodded, forcing a neutral expression. Inside, though, my mind was racing. Daniel had proof, months' worth of it. Whoever was manipulating the reports wasn't making small adjustments. They had been shifting numbers for almost half a year. That meant major financial decisions could have been based on false data. Budgets, bonuses, department allocations. And in a company our size, those changes didn't just cause inconvenience, they changed careers. And now the CEO needed someone to blame. Our first activity was some trust-building exercise involving ropes, wooden planks, and teamwork. Normally, these games annoyed everyone, but today people were too distracted to even pretend to care. Half the group barely listened to instructions. A few glanced at their phones, probably messaging coworkers from other teams, gossip spreading faster than the sea breeze. During the activity, I caught bits of whisper conversations. Why would he make that announcement here? Maybe he wants to fire someone in front of everyone. I heard it's about the ops department. The liability, that has to be someone specific, right? My chest tightened. They weren't talking loudly, but I knew exactly who they meant. The uncertainty was worse than any accusation. Even people who liked me didn't know what to say. They just stayed quiet and avoided standing too close. Halfway through the game, I noticed someone watching me again, not Raymond this time. It was Claire, the finance director. She was usually friendly, always smiling, always offering help when needed. But today her expression was unreadable. She stood with her arms crossed, eyes narrowed slightly as she studied me from across the lawn. When I caught her staring, she didn't look away. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. Amina followed my gaze. "She knows something," she whispered. "Or she suspects me," I muttered. "Maybe both." We finished the activity without much enthusiasm, and everyone scattered again. I headed toward the shade, needing a moment to breathe, when Claire approached me with a calm smile. "Can we talk for a second?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. My heart pounded, but I nodded. "Sure." She led me toward the side path, near a row of palm trees. It was quiet there, away from the crowd. "I'll keep this short," she said softly. "There's been talk. A lot of it. And I want you to hear this from me, directly instead of from rumors." I braced myself. "Okay. There are discrepancies in the financial reports," she said. "We've all seen them. But the timing, it lines up with some decisions your department made recently. People are starting to question things." I stared at her, stunned. "My department? I didn't touch those reports." "I know," she replied quickly. "I know you wouldn't alter anything. But perception matters in situations like this." She paused, scanning the lawn to make sure no one was nearby. "And the CEO seems very invested in pushing a certain narrative." That confirmed it. It wasn't just my paranoia. He was steering suspicion toward me. "Claire," I said carefully, "you work in finance. You've seen the original numbers. Do you really think this is my fault?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but I think someone wants it to look that way." The words settled between us, heavy and dangerous. "Be careful," she whispered. "The CEO doesn't make public accusations unless he already has a plan. And if you're in the way of that plan..." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. She walked away before I could ask anything more, blending back into a group of managers chatting near the drinks table. I leaned against a palm tree, trying to steady my breathing. Every new piece of information only deepened the mystery. Why was the CEO so determined to pin the issue on me? Who was really behind the altered reports? And how many people already knew something was wrong? Before I could think further, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Not safe here. Meet me behind the conference hall in 10 minutes. Come alone. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Amina walked toward me, noticing my expression. What happened? I showed her the message. She frowned. It could be Daniel. Or someone else, I whispered. Do you want me to come with you? I hesitated. The message said come alone. And if it was Daniel, he wouldn't send something that risky if it wasn't important. I'll go, I said quietly. But stay somewhere nearby, just in case. Amina nodded reluctantly. Text me if anything feels wrong. I slipped away from the lawn, walking down the path toward the back of the resort. The conference hall stood tall and quiet, its white walls glowing under the sun. The farther I walked, the fewer people I saw. Soon, it was silent except for distant waves. I reached the back of the hall and looked around. Empty. For a moment, I wondered if it was a mistake, or worse, a trap. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned sharply and froze. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Amina. It wasn't anyone I expected. The person who stepped out from behind the building looked at me with an expression that made my heart drop. I think you and I need to clear something up, they said quietly. And in that moment, I realized the conflict was bigger, darker, and more twisted than I ever imagined. The person who stepped out from behind the conference hall was none other than Claire. But the calm, polite expression she'd worn earlier was gone. Now her face was tense, eyes sharp, like she had been holding something in for far too long. We need to talk, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. And before you panic, I wasn't the one who sent you that message. But when I saw you heading this way alone, I knew something was happening. My heartbeat kicked into my throat. Then who sent it? I don't know, she said. But you shouldn't stay out here long. People are watching. Who? I asked, barely above a whisper. She hesitated, then shook her head. It's not safe to say yet. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the front of the resort. But back here, everything felt isolated. Too quiet. Too tense. Claire stepped a little closer, her voice dropping. Listen. Earlier, when I talked to you, I didn't tell you everything. I couldn't. Not out in the open. I felt myself stiffen. Then tell me now. She took a slow breath. I started noticing problems around the same time you did. Numbers changing without authorization. Copies missing from shared folders. Logs that didn't match. At first, I thought it was a glitch. But then I checked again. And again. Someone was logging into the system late at night. Someone with access. My fingers clenched at my sides. Who? That's the thing, she whispered. Their ID was hidden behind admin privileges. Someone with authority. Someone high enough that no one questions it. My stomach twisted. The CEO? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she gave a small, tight nod that told me everything. But before I could respond, footsteps echoed from the corner of the building. Claire's eyes widened. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me behind a tall potted plant just as two directors walked by, deep in conversation about the CEO's morning speech. Everyone says he already made up his mind, one of them whispered. He's going to remove someone before the retreat ends. Who? The other asked. I heard he's targeting operations. My chest tightened. The directors kept walking until their voices faded. Only then did Claire release my wrist. You're running out of time, she said firmly. You and Daniel both. If you have evidence, you need to protect it. I don't have anything yet, I admitted. Daniel does. She swallowed. Then you need to get to him before someone else does. The words barely left her mouth when my phone buzzed again. It was Daniel. Meet me. Emergency. I'm not safe. I felt the world tilt. He's in trouble. Claire stepped back. Go. Now. I'll cover for you if anyone asks. I didn't waste a second. I sprinted across the side path, through a line of palm trees, and toward the inner courtyard where staff were setting up for the evening dinner. I dodged clusters of employees, trying not to draw attention, my heart racing with every step. Daniel had included a location pin. The far side of the resort, near the service building. A place most guests didn't even know existed. By the time I reached the narrow walkway behind the service building, I was out of breath. The area was quiet, the only sound the hum of machinery and the distant crash of waves. The walls cast long shadows across the ground, making the space feel darker than it should have been. I spotted him halfway down the walkway, pacing anxiously. "Daniel!" I called out. He spun around, relief flooding his face. "Thank God. I didn't know if you'd see the message in time." "What happened?" I asked, stepping closer. "I think someone followed me," he said quickly. "I had the reports with me. The originals. The screenshots. All of it. But when I went to the lounge to grab coffee, someone rummaged through my bag. My pulse spiked. Did they take anything?" "No. I had already moved the files somewhere safe. But the fact they were looking means they know I'm involved." The wall suddenly felt too close. "Who do you think it was?" I asked. He shook his head. "I didn't see. But I heard someone mention that the CEO wants a private meeting with the board tonight. And if he convinces them you're responsible for the data issues," his voice tightened, "you'll lose your position before you even get a chance to speak." I stared at him, stunned. "So he's pushing through a removal?" "He's pushing hard," Daniel said, voice trembling just slightly. "And if he succeeds, he'll bury the truth." My thoughts raced. The retreat, the morning announcement, the way he watched me on the terrace, the missing files, the altered reports, everything connected in a way that felt too deliberate to be coincidence. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. "This is what I managed to save. Not everything, but enough to prove something is wrong." I took it gently, fear and adrenaline tangling together. "We have to show this to someone. HR legal. Anyone who isn't under him." Daniel gave a humorless laugh. "Most of them are under him." He was right. The CEO had influence over almost every department, and if he had already framed me as the liability, no one would question his narrative unless we had solid proof. "Then we need someone he can't control," I said. Daniel blinked. "Who?" Before I could answer, a shadow appeared at the end of the walkway. We both froze. Someone was standing there, watching, not moving, just like the CEO earlier, but this silhouette was shorter, stockier, not Raymond. Daniel stepped closer to me, voice dropping. "Don't say anything." The figure took one step forward, then another, walking into the light. It was a member of the IT team. A senior specialist known for fixing technical issues so quietly that no one ever noticed him. He wasn't smiling. His expression was tight, almost urgent. "I've been looking for you," he said, eyes flicking between me and Daniel. My heart skipped. "Why?" He glanced over his shoulder. "Not here. Too many cameras." Daniel inhaled sharply. "So you know." "I know a lot," the IT specialist said. "More than I should. And if you don't move right now, you'll both get caught in something you can't get out of." I felt the air thicken around us. Daniel whispered, "Is this a warning?" "It's a choice," the specialist said. "Follow me, and you might have a chance to expose what's happening. Stay here, and you're handing the CEO exactly what he wants." The tension snapped tight inside me. The retreat, the CEO's announcement, the missing files, the secret meetings, the pressure building with every passing hour. And now someone from IT, someone who had access to the digital trails none of us could see, was offering us a way out. But only if we followed him into the unknown. Daniel looked at me, eyes wide with fear and trust. The specialist nodded toward a side door leading into the service corridors of the resort. "If you want the truth," he said quietly, "this is your only chance." I exhaled, every nerve electrified. We stepped forward, toward the door, toward the darkness inside, and toward a truth that might destroy everything we thought we knew. The person standing in front of me stepped fully into the light, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Claire, but the calm, helpful tone she used earlier was gone. Her expression was tight, her jaw clenched, her eyes sharper than I had ever seen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet behind the conference hall felt too still, too deliberate, like the world was waiting for one wrong move. "You shouldn't be meeting people in hidden corners like this," she said quietly, her voice steady but cold. "Especially today." I swallowed, choosing my words carefully. You sent the message? No, she said. Her eyes flicked down the path behind me as if checking who else might appear. Someone wanted you here. But since you're here, we need to talk. My heart hammered. If she hadn't sent the message, then who had? And why? I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting someone else to step out. But the path was empty. Claire took one slow step closer. I didn't want to involve myself, she said. But things are getting out of control. The reports, the numbers, the CEO, all of it. You said you knew I wasn't the one altering the reports, I said. So what do you really know? She looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled like she'd been holding something back for months. The financial inconsistencies didn't start 5 months ago. They started 8. My stomach dropped. 8. Whoever is behind this, she continued. They were careful at first. Small changes, adjustments no one would question. But recently the changes got bigger. Sloppier. Too many for one person alone. I stared at her, my mind racing through every report, every number, every late-night email I had reviewed over the past year. Why didn't you tell anyone? I tried. Her voice cracked slightly, but Raymond shut it down. Every time I brought up inconsistencies, he said they were from your department. The familiar weight pressed against my chest again. But I never. I know, she said, her tone softening for a moment. I never believed you did. But someone needed a scapegoat, and you were the easiest target. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Someone had planned this, not just thrown blame randomly. They had built a narrative, slowly, carefully, connecting me to mistakes I never made. Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. Fast, purposeful. Claire's eyes widened. We shouldn't be seen together like this, she whispered urgently. You need to go. I turned just as Amina rounded the corner, breathless and tense. There you are, she said, eyes darting between me and Claire. Someone is looking for you. And it's not Daniel. Claire stepped back, her expression shifting again, guarding herself. Be careful, she murmured, then disappeared down the opposite path. Amina grabbed my arm. Come on. We need to move. We hurried back toward the main resort building, but even as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following us. Every shadow felt too close. Every face seemed to be watching from the corner of my eye. We reached the entrance, and Amina stopped me before we went inside. It gets worse, she whispered. I just overheard something. I braced myself. What now? The CEO told HR there's going to be an urgent leadership announcement tonight. Private. Only directors invited. My breath hitched. A private leadership meeting at a retreat? That never happened unless something major was unfolding. And I heard him say your name, Amina added. Not loudly. Not clearly. But I'm sure. A cold wave washed through me. This wasn't just a plan anymore. It was happening. We stepped into the hotel lobby, trying to blend in with the flow of employees grabbing coffee and snacks between sessions. But before we could get far, someone called out, Director of Operations. A moment! My stomach twisted as Raymond's assistant approached us. She always carried herself with perfect posture, perfect politeness, and perfect timing. The CEO would like to see you, she said with a tight smile. Amina froze beside me. Right now? Yes, she replied. In his private room. A private room. Not a meeting room. Not the office. His suite. My heart slammed against my ribs. Is there a reason? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He said it's regarding the announcement he made earlier. Amina's hand found my arm again, her grip tense. I'll come with. No, the assistant cut in smoothly. He asked for her alone. Something in her tone made my skin crawl. But I nodded. All right. Lead the way. As we walked down the quiet hallway toward the CEO's suite, every instinct inside me screamed that something was wrong, terribly wrong. The air felt heavier. The corridor seemed too long. Even the assistant looked unusually stiff. When we reached the door, she knocked once, then opened it. Go in, she said softly. Inside, the room was dimly lit, curtains drawn, a familiar cologne lingering in the air. But Raymond wasn't near the table or the sofa. He was standing by the window, staring out at the ocean. When he turned to face me, his expression wasn't angry. It was calm. Too calm. Close the door, he said. I did. Slowly. He stepped forward, clasping his hands behind his back. You've been busy today, he said, his voice casual. Walking around, whispering, meeting people behind buildings. My pulse spiked. I haven't. He lifted a finger. Don't lie. Not today. I swallowed hard, feeling the walls close in. You've made things difficult for me, he continued. You were supposed to be cooperative, quiet, useful. His eyes narrowed slightly. But instead, you went digging. My breath caught. Raymond, I didn't dig into anything. You did, he snapped, voice breaking for the first time. Then he collected himself again. You found numbers you shouldn't have seen. Silence filled the room, thick, suffocating. I know who really altered the reports, I whispered. He tilted his head slightly. Do you? I nodded. It wasn't me. Raymond smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. It was slow, practiced, calculating. You think you figured out anything, but you haven't. You're in over your head. Before I could reply, someone else stepped out from the back of the suite. I gasped. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't anyone I would have suspected. It was someone whose involvement made the entire situation twist into something far more dangerous. Someone who should have been on my side. Someone who had access to everything. Someone who had more to lose than anyone else if the truth came out. Hello, they said quietly. I guess it's time you heard the full story. My legs went weak, because standing beside the CEO was Amina, and she wasn't smiling. The person who stepped out from behind the conference hall was Claire. But this time, her calm, helpful smile was gone. Her expression was sharp, focused, and almost conflicted. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching before stepping closer. We don't have much time, she said quietly. And before anything explodes, you need to hear something from me. My pulse quickened. What is it? She took a slow breath. I wasn't honest with you earlier. Not fully. Her eyes shifted nervously. The discrepancies in the financial reports. I know exactly when they started. And who ordered them. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Who? Claire hesitated, then looked directly into my eyes. Raymond. The word hit harder than I expected, even though I'd suspected it. Hearing it confirmed, spoken so plainly, made the entire situation feel heavier. The CEO wasn't just covering up for someone. He was behind everything. He asked me to adjust department budgets, Claire continued. Said it was temporary, said it was necessary for a long-term plan. He didn't give details, just instructions. And at first, I trusted him. He's the CEO, right? You assume there's a strategy. Her voice lowered. But then he started asking for bigger changes. Risky ones. Things that didn't make sense anymore. My chest tightened as her words sank in. And the changes lined up with my department. Yes, she said bluntly. He chose your department because it was easy to blame. You weren't close to him. You weren't in his inner circle. You were the safest director to frame. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The anger, disbelief, and betrayal tangled inside me, leaving me frozen. I told him I was uncomfortable, she whispered. But instead of explaining anything, he gave me a warning. A clear one. That my job depended on my cooperation. Slowly, I understood why she looked so tense earlier that day. She wasn't just trying to help me, she was protecting herself too. So why tell me now? I asked. Claire looked down. Because he's planning to make a move tonight, after the final session. And if he does, you won't get a chance to defend yourself. The world around me suddenly felt too loud, even though we were standing in silence. Before I could speak, footsteps echoed from the other side of the hall. Claire stiffened again. It was Raymond. He wasn't close yet, but close enough to see us. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with surprise, but with recognition. As if he had expected this moment, Claire quickly pulled away from me. We weren't talking about anything important, she said loudly, just as Raymond approached. He didn't answer her. He looked at me instead. We need to discuss something, he said calmly. Privately. Every instinct screamed that going anywhere alone with him would be dangerous. But refusing would make it obvious I knew something. So I forced my voice to stay steady. Sure. He gestured toward the side path, leading to a smaller lounge area reserved for directors. Claire stepped back, worry all over her face, but she didn't stop us. As we walked, Raymond's silence felt heavier than any accusation. The ocean breeze hummed around us, but the tension swallowed the sound. Finally, we reached the empty lounge, and he closed the glass door behind us. "I've noticed," he began, "that you've been unusually tense during this retreat." I didn't reply. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've been talking to people, asking questions, following breadcrumbs that don't belong to you." Again, I stayed silent. "And that concerns me," he continued, "because the company needs stability, loyalty, understanding, not someone who creates noise." I held his gaze. "If you're accusing me of something, say it." He smiled. "You're being emotional. I'm being honest." That smile faded just enough to reveal the irritation behind it. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "You've had a good run here, but your department is struggling, and someone has to take responsibility. It's better if you accept the role." "The role of scapegoat?" I asked quietly. His eyes sharpened. "Careful. You alter the reports," I said, my voice low but steady. "Not me. Not my department." He stepped closer, too close. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough, and I'm not the only one who noticed." His jaw tightened. In that tight second, I realized something important. He wasn't angry because I was wrong. He was angry because I had finally cornered him. He leaned in slightly. "This company is about growth, strategy. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And you're becoming a problem." My heart pounded, but before I could respond, there was a loud knock on the glass door. "Daniel." His expression was urgent, almost panicked. When Raymond turned to look, Daniel mouthed something to me. "Now." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "We're not finished." "We are," I said. I pushed past him, opened the door, and stepped into the hallway. Daniel grabbed my arm gently, pulling me aside. "We have to move," he said quickly. "He's trying to erase everything. The files, the backups. He just sent orders." I intercepted one. My breath caught. "He knows we have evidence. He suspects. And he's not waiting anymore." Before I could respond, another figure rushed toward us. "Claire." "Someone tipped off the board," she whispered breathlessly. "They're calling an emergency virtual meeting tonight. They want everyone present, especially Raymond." I stared at her, stunned. "You told them?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I didn't have to. Someone else beat me to it." "Who?" Daniel asked. Claire swallowed. "One of the board members received anonymous documents exposing the financial alterations." Daniel and I exchanged a stunned look. "It wasn't me," he whispered. "And it wasn't me," I said. Claire shook her head slowly. "I don't know who did it, but whoever sent it, they sent everything." A heavy silence fell between us. Someone else knew the truth. Someone else had been watching. And someone else wanted the CEO exposed. We didn't even get to question it before the resort speakers crackled to life. "All directors, please report to the main hall. Immediate attendance required." Daniel exhaled shakily. Claire looked pale. I felt my pulse racing again, but this time for a different reason. The moment we had been spiraling toward, the climax, the confrontation, the truth was here. As we walked toward the hall, the tension in the air felt electric. Everyone rushed inside, confused whispers filling the space. Raymond stood on stage, stiff, pale, nothing like the confident leader from that morning. The giant screen behind him flickered, and the board appeared on the video call. Their expressions were serious, unreadable. One of them spoke. "We have received documents," she said, her tone cold. "Documents suggesting deliberate financial manipulation within this company. We are here to address it immediately." Every director in the room turned toward Raymond. His face froze, but before he could speak, another screen lit up. A second file had been uploaded, a file none of us expected. Because this one didn't just expose altered reports. It exposed something else. A hidden email thread. A plan that involved more than one person. And one of the names on that thread wasn't the CEO. It was someone standing in the very room with us. Someone no one had suspected. And the moment their name appeared on the screen, the entire hall erupted in shock. Because the real mastermind behind the entire scheme wasn't Raymond. It was someone far closer than any of us realized. When everything finally exploded in that conference hall, it felt like the air itself shifted. People who had avoided looking at me all weekend suddenly stared at me with wide eyes, as if seeing the real story for the first time. The truth was out. Raymond's plan, pushing the blame on me, calling me the liability, turning the retreat into a stage for my downfall, had fallen apart the moment Daniel presented the full set of records. Screenshots, timestamps, missing files, altered entries, and finally the access logs that showed exactly who had entered the system each time the data was changed. It wasn't me. It wasn't my team. It wasn't any incompetence he hinted at. It was the CEO himself, and two senior executives who quietly benefited from the shifts in budgets. The shock in the room when that was revealed was something I'll never forget. But after the climax came the silence, the kind that almost hums in the air, like everyone is trying to understand how something that big managed to stay hidden so long. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet. It felt like something delicate, something unstable, like the wrong word could still break everything apart. After Raymond was escorted out of the hall by the board members who unexpectedly arrived halfway through the final confrontation, the retreat turned upside down. The activities were canceled, the music in the lounge stopped, and most employees stayed in small circles, whispering nonstop. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next, who would be fired, who would be questioned, what this meant for the future of the company. For the first time since we arrived, no one was pretending to relax. I sat outside on the terrace with Amina and Daniel, watching the ocean move softly under the evening light. It should have been calming, but my mind was still racing with everything that happened. Amina nudged me gently. "You did it," she said with a small smile. "You survived the craziest retreat of your life." I let out a shaky laugh. I didn't do it alone. Daniel shifted awkwardly beside us. He had always been quiet, always staying away from office drama, but today he looked different, more confident, more grounded. "You would have done the same for me," he said. Someone had to tell the truth. Words felt too small for the gratitude I felt, so I simply nodded. But even with the truth out, there were still loose ends. The board was investigating, the executives involved were suspended, and employees were being privately interviewed. The company needed clarity, stability, and trust again, and somehow, even after all of this, they expected me to return to my role like nothing had happened. Later that evening, I received a message asking me to meet the board in the same room where the chaos began. I walked in with steady steps, even though my hands were trembling slightly. The room felt colder now, the chairs rearranged, the projector still displaying one of the financial graphs Daniel had shown earlier. One of the board members, an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, motioned for me to sit. "You were treated unfairly," she began, "and we intend to address that." I stayed quiet, waiting. "What happened here today exposed serious misconduct," she continued, "but it also revealed something important. You remained steady. You didn't lash out. You didn't run. And when the truth came to light, you still handled yourself professionally. That matters." I didn't know what to say. Praise felt strange after everything. Another board member added, "As of now, the CEO is suspended pending a full investigation. This company is going to need strong leadership during the transition. We want you to be part of that." My breath caught. "Me? You've been running the operations quietly and efficiently for years," he said. "It's time someone competent, someone trusted, steps forward. We'd like to offer you the role of interim COO until the investigation settles." I blinked, stunned. The role. After everything. After being labeled a liability. Amina's voice echoed in my mind. "You survived the craziest retreat of your life." Maybe I did more than survive. I accepted. Not because of pride, but because I wanted to rebuild what had been damaged. I wanted to protect the people who worked hard every day, the ones caught in the middle of corporate storms they didn't create. When I stepped out of the room, the sunset painted the sky in warm colors, and for the first time all weekend, I felt like I could breathe normally. But the final twist came later that night. I was packing my bag, ready to leave first thing in the morning, when my phone buzzed with a message. A single line. "You exposed him." Good. But the numbers weren't just his doing. Before I could react, another message appeared. There's someone else. Someone much higher. And they're not done. My heart stopped for a second. Another message. Be careful. This was just the beginning. There was no name. No number. No clue if it was a threat or a warning. I showed the messages to Daniel the next morning. He read them twice, his face growing pale. This isn't from Raymond, he said. This sounds like someone who knows the system better. Someone with access beyond the CEO. The possibility chilled me. The retreat was over. The CEO was suspended. The truth had shaken the company to its core. But the messages reminded me that some secrets were still buried deeper. Some people were still hiding in the shadows. And the person who contacted me, they weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to prepare me. As I rode back to the city with Amina and Daniel, watching the resort fade behind us, I knew two things for sure. First, the weekend had changed the entire direction of my life. And second, even though the story had reached its ending, the world I stepped back into was shifting, and I would need every ounce of courage, clarity, and strength I had to face what came next. But for now, the chapter was closed. The truth was out, and the label that once tried to break me had become nothing more than a reminder of how easily lies fall apart when real evidence finally comes to light. I wasn't a liability. I never had been. And this time, the whole company knew it.